I just want to welcome everybody to our 8th class, Securing and Allocating Resources. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for your understanding and patience on Tuesday. It's been interesting to be here in Mexico. I was in Oaxaca, which is an absolutely beautiful place in Mexico. And now I'm on a little island with my family, just getting some time. But I'm really excited about this class because I think that it will give you the tools and tips you need to, really do this work. And from a very personal place, resources are critical to this work. And I want to be able to equip you with what you need to be able to ask for them on a continuous basis, not just a one-time basis. I also think it's connected to burnout, which we identified in our first class. So it's a personal topic for a lot of us. So let's get started. A couple of things. After last class, I updated assignment number 6, as well as the module project number 1, the SWOT matrix, to include a purpose. So when you read that purpose, hopefully, if you haven't done the assignment, this is a chance to revisit it. If you have, I think what you've done is great. I will certainly take a look at it with the consideration that maybe you haven't looked at the purpose, but the purpose is meant to clarify what I'm looking for out of this assignment, and hopefully that offers a little bit more to you. I also have my video off. I feel like some people's internet connection, including mine, may not be as stable, so I wanted to not interfere with that. I will turn it on and off, but I do ask that only those speaking keep it on, so that we can have as clear of a connection as possible. So thank you for understanding. After last class, we talked about employee resource groups, and I wanted to tell you a quick story. One of the employee resource groups that I worked with at Amazon is called Body Positive Peers, and it was in that group that I learned about reclaiming the word fat, and how people within the community, like a lot of us that reclaim words, said, there's nothing wrong with this word. We use it with pride, and we encourage others to do the same. And I joined this group because it was open to people from all different body positivity backgrounds. And we did a talk on how body mass index, BMI, is racist, and it was run by a woman named Dr. Sabrina Strings, and it was a complete learning moment for me. I will share the link with you it's a link to an article that speaks about how for a long time a lot of people within the workplace who are of different body sizes have faced a lot of discrimination, and there's stereotypes associated with that. So that's just something I learned from an intersectional lens, working with employee resource groups, that it wasn't just body positivity peers, it was also how that impacts people from the Black and Brown communities. So that was interesting. Our class today is on resources. Resources are a kind of supply that can be drawn on by a person or an organization in order to function and execute plans and projects. So keep that in mind. It's a supply, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And the first thing that we're going to do is to come at this with the lens that DEI is an investment and not a cost. If you follow me on Twitter, I just recently posted something about our language, and I spoke about that. I said, we have to talk about DEI as what it is. We've talked about it for so long as volunteer work, as a cost, a problem to be solved. But if we ourselves as a community shift our language intentionally to talking about it ourselves as an investment, as community work, as cultural work, as long-term, then we can. Somebody told me once, people get behind winners. So when we talk about it like that, they get excited about the work as well. So this is where we are. Our first 4 classes were on awareness. Our next 4, which we're in today, last one is accountability. And then our last 4 classes will be on action. Our usual DEI values, as you see, have changed. Create brave and safe spaces, to create and engage in safe spaces. I'm open to feedback around that if you have anything further that you'd like to share. Our house rules, and then our usual question with the middle icon with the light bulb saying, how can we be more inclusive? And I captured your answers from our last breakout room here in 5 different suggestions, which I'll read out. So thank you for that. I saved the chat and I made sure I captured what I could there as well. So number 1, when we talk about employee resource groups, and I really applaud this, offer compensation through PTO or professional development. So what this suggestion does is compensation is not just money, right? The truth of the matter is that a lot of organizations are bootstrapped. We don't necessarily have the funds that some larger organizations have, which is why if you were part of the office hours, I was asking some of the people asking questions, are you part of a profit or a nonprofit? I have to check my own biases as somebody that came from the tech industry where we have a lot of resources, where people, the average tenure is 14 months. So extending our understanding of compensation beyond just cash bonuses or salaries is important. Number 2, suggesting that ERG leaders change their titles, or offering them the suggestion of changing their titles on resumes and LinkedIn. A couple of you were asking in office hours, how do I break into the industry? Take the work that you're doing right now, whether it's in your community, in your families, and title that. And maybe even add an email signature. These are great ways to tap into work you're already doing. Number 3, ensure consistent equity of ERGs through bylaws and policies. Excellent point. We see a lot of inequities in employee resource groups, where some get more funding than others, more access to leaders. So having that baked into the bylaws is really important. Create solutions for the 10-year I didn't mean to say for the 10 years, but 10 years as in long term, and offer sabbatical. People need time to rest. People need to come at this work from a fresh lens. And we can start offering that in terms of paid leave or leave of absence, with the promise that people can come back to the roles that they left. And finally, quarterly evaluations, charters, goals, KPIs. KPI stands for key performance indicators, to ensure value is measured. So thank you. That was a great class for me to hear from all of you and to continue to learn from all of you, which takes us to our agenda today. We have a couple of things. Number 1, defining resources. Number 2, making the case. Number 3, I'm going to touch on diversity programs. Number 4, I'm actually going to give you a template for a diversity budget that I've used, and it's worked really well. And then workshop number 8. So for workshop number 8, I have captured an organization called the Nippon Foundation, and it's part of a wider collective called the Valuable 500. And it's a large global network of CEOs that have committed to disability inclusion. And in 2021, they made an investment of $5 million. And following their move, a further 54 companies joined the same collective, so the Valuable 500, which prioritizes disability inclusion. This is over, 35 countries, and include different organizations like Burberry, Coke, Coca-Cola, Credit Suisse, Nestle, Siemens AG. And my question to you in the breakout rooms is, how would you, taking this example and seeing the ripple effect into different organizations, how would you ask for a resource? So there's 2 options in your group. You can either take 1 minute to practice a pitch as to how you ask for a particular resource, or, because I want to give this option, I know I would sweat on the spot if I was asked to do a pitch. The other option is just to take 1 minute to discuss what resource you would like to ask for. So perhaps you can use an example from your organization or your own startup. And then what's one challenge with that? And then together, hopefully you can arrive at a solution. So that's that level of peer learning. So I was thinking about icebreakers. I've been doing a couple icebreakers, and sometimes icebreakers are a little cringy, right? You do them and you think, oh, okay, what would I eat and what's my favorite food? There's this really funny woman, her name is Corporate Natalie, and she did a whole piece on icebreakers and how they don't really amount to anything. So instead, I wanted to tell you a really quick story. This is a story about my family, actually. And then I wanted you, following the story, to think about one thing that you've learned from somebody else in this group. And then maybe you can just type a word in. It could be something like humility, or something about what it's like to come to new to a country and speak a different language. But I'd love to see you type that in, that one word, as I tell you this quick story. So the quick story is, once upon a time there was a man, and he was born premature, so premature that he had to be wrapped in uh, cloth that was dipped in mustard seed oil, which warms up the body naturally. At that time, the turn of the century, they didn't have incubators. So because he was premature, he was his parents didn't want him, so he was raised by his grandparents. And it turns out that he, I guess, inherited some really great traits in work and discipline and all kinds of things. He read a lot, and he ended up going to Cornell University and getting a PhD at age 24 in agriculture. And he became the head of the Food and Agricultural Organization, termed the FAO, as a branch of the United Nations, and was responsible for all of Australia and Asia. And he got married, and he had 2 children, and one of his children decided to follow in his footsteps. And she became a microbiologist. So she went to McGill University. For some of you who grew up in Canada, this is a familiar university. And then she tried to enter the workplace. And what ended up happening is she couldn't get a job. She tried to get a job in labs. She tried to get into the workplace, and it was no, no, no. So she ended up becoming a volunteer, and finally, after about 10 years, got a job as a teacher. And when she got promoted to the head of her science department, she got told, "We know why you got this job, aka it's because of the color of your skin." And I carry that story with me every day, because it's the story of my mother and my grandfather, and how I've seen both ends of the spectrum, career success and career hardship. And I look at it through an intersectional lens of an Asian man who did very well, and yet an Asian woman who had a lot of that passed down to her. And it was just, she just did not have the opportunities despite having all of the credentials lined up. So I share this because I think that we've done a lot of work in policy and practice and frameworks, but I want to encourage you to continue to uphold people's stories. There's a lesson in all of this, and perhaps the lesson from this story is different from all of you, but I would love for you to take maybe 30 seconds and just type in one word of something you've learned from somebody else in this class, and I would love to do the same. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. So as you go through that, these answers are just beautiful. Privilege, compassion, bravery, courage. This is what I mean when I say that we're stronger as a collective. If we take all of this together, you can see how much power there is in community. So I'm going to share a quick poll. It's about resources. How do you feel about the resources your organization is putting towards DEI? I also put in neutral for those of us that have our own organization, and so they themselves may be responsible for coming across the resources. So I wanted to give a space for those. Okay. So here are our results. It's all across the board. Great, good, neutral, not good, and terrible. This is great. This is very encouraging. It means that the organizations that you're working for, or if you're working for yourself, do see a commitment to DEI. So let me take you to our slide. So defining resources. Resources, a lot of people, when they hear resources, they think money, and that is not how I see it. Resources, in my opinion, are defined as time, money, and access. So when we approach people and we ask them for resources, or we approach our organizations, we can think of it in these three areas. Access can also be extended to include labor or expertise, right? And I have here a side note, in the DEI space, resources continue to be a moving target. They reflect the commitment of the organization to its internal employees and external customers, or whoever your stakeholders are, on an ongoing basis. So a couple statistics, nearly 80% of those surveyed, and this is a CNBC survey, said that they want to work for a company that values DEI. DEI saves organizations money, and when a DEI team must constantly demonstrate how they have saved the organization money, it forces their measure of success to be quantifiably financial. And this is why I've created these three circles, because we don't just want to communicate the value of DEI through money. We want to communicate it through how much expertise and access we get, how much time goes into the work that we do, because that gives a more holistic lens of what this work is really all about. So we talked about this in the office hours, but I really wanted to touch on this. If you're looking for a way to measure DEI, there's two ways. Number one are inputs, and number one are outputs. So an example of an input is something that goes into your DEI effort. For example, the number of people joining employee resource groups, or the number of people joining your organization, or the number of people sharing positive testimonials, right? So this is a mix of qualitative and quantitative. It could be things people say, or, through a number. An example of outputs, which is what comes out of the DEI work, could be a lower level of attrition. Attrition, remember, is the rate at which people leave an organization. More customers or clients or stakeholders, and also more awards and recognition, because that can lead to more investments. So think about it as something that goes in and something that goes out. So making the case, when we're looking for our resources, again, trifecta, right? We're talking about time, access, and money. We have to make the case. And this article is brilliant. It came out by Bank of America this year. It was captured by a DEI consulting organization, Canaries. If you haven't heard of Canaries, follow them on Instagram. They're fantastic. And it basically put a number to how much we're losing economically through lack of diversity. This is referring to American companies. So if anybody has a similar statistic for Canadian organizations, I would love to see it, or any other global organizations. But this is a very powerful number. And I've talked about this a few times. If you're trying to make the case, point to a recent statistic, because it really shows the impact of this work. And before I go further, I wanted to say, if you show this statistic and you're still not getting the resources, lean into hopefully the one leader that you have that does believe in this work. Again, I've tried and tested this model, and I've been in rooms full of people where they do not support this work. But when I find that one ally that has access, it changes the entire conversation. So another thing, Jeffrey, we talked about this in the office hours, about how to do training. So this diagram right here, this is pulled from Deloitte. I use this all the time. I absolutely love it. Is the 6 signature traits of inclusive leaders. I've linked it down below, so when you get the deck, you can look it up. But this is another way to make the case when we're talking to leaders or those with access, and we're asking for our resources. Again, time, money, and access. we can show them the slide and we can say, these are the 6 signature traits. And these are my 4 questions. What kind of an organization do you want? What kind of an organization are you proud to lead? What kind of testimonials do you want? And what kind of employee relationships do you want? And by looking at this image holistically, everybody has at least one of these that they can improve on, right? So instead of saying good guy, bad guy, binary, we're bringing people into conversation by saying these are our growth opportunities. This is a resource that has been created by a very reputable organization, Deloitte, shared widely. What is it that you want to work on? Okay, great. Now let's talk about the DEI budget. This is what I need. And quickly, before I go further, I had mentioned earlier a DEI practitioner by the name of Lily Zhang. They had written an article about how to bring white men into conversation, and they spoke specifically about something similar to this, that we want to frame identity as an insight, and we want to focus on equality as a principle. So these are my 2 slides for making the case, which brings me to the real, meat of this conversation, which is diversity program. Sorry, I see I was muted. What was the last thing that somebody heard me say?
Diversity programs.
Diversity program.
Okay, perfect. So this slide over here, I'm going to walk you through it. When we talk about investing in DEI programs, we don't just want to say DEI programs. We really want to go back to the research. And what this table shows us right here is that these are, let me read it to you so that we're clear. The 3 most popular interventions make firms less diverse. So what we have here is the 3 most popular programs that a lot of organizations put in place, but they actually hurt DEI. Not because managers one of the reasons is that managers resist strong arming. And for example, job tests, which we see here, actually hurt women and minorities more, not because they perform poorly, but because managers don't always test people equally. Very often they give people that are similar to themselves a pass. And so we can implement something like this, but it doesn't have the results that we want it to have. And this is rooted in research. So what we have here in the orange is showing us the negative impact of having these programs. So mandatory diversity training. Number 2 is job tests. And what that refers to is a test that you do during the interview phase. And then number 3 is a grievance system, where we give people a system through which they share their grievances without putting any policies or practices in place. So, and sorry, before I go to the next slide, over here, I encourage you to think intersectionally. So what we capture here, there is definitely a degree of intersectionality here. We're looking at gender and race, but there's a lot of identities here that we're not necessarily capturing. And a lot of that comes down to what legally we are allowed to capture. So this is why you may see some of the resources I share focus on race and gender, but I definitely encourage you to look at this through an intersectional lens. So conversely, these are the DEI programs that do get results. The 3 that definitely stick out are mentoring, number 2, diversity task force, and number 3, diversity managers, or another way to put that in words is managers who are diverse, right? And I looked at these numbers. So you see all of these are positive, but they're positive for different groups in different ways. But these 3, you can look at it as the bottom 3, are the ones that have positive results for all groups. So these are definitely, if you get the DEI resources, these are great ones to invest in. And as you know, we talked about mentorship, but let's extend that to include sponsorship as well.
Dea, are there examples for what a diversity task force would look like, what that means exactly?
Yeah, good question. There's no examples here. I've linked to the article, but I can definitely tell you that what that means is audits, right? It's people coming in and saying, these are the gaps and these are the solutions that we want to work on. So it comes in the form of somebody being tasked with doing an assessment and being assigned the work of coming in and finding where the gaps are and arriving at solutions, instead of leaving it for each person to, each team or each manager to come to that solution themselves. So it's really taking out the manager subjectivity and then relying on like more of a system and somebody who can come in and give a lay of the land. Ruby, I see here, can you elaborate on diversity managers? Yes, it just simply means managers that are diverse. So when we have a culture where people in managerial spaces are not just from one race or gender, but they're diverse across different races and genders intersectionally, that has had very positive results on who stays on teams, which is what this table is essentially showing. Okay. So I wanted to take a pause and read this quote for you. Doing stuff for the sake of doing stuff is really obviously inauthentic for the people who work for you. So as much as there is so much work to do in this industry, which is why I always approach it from an abundance mindset, there's space for all of us. But just going there, just doing it is not, we need to do an assessment of where an organization really is and what the gaps are. And that's why I showed you the previous slides to say, let's be very intentional about the programs and policies we put in place. If we get for example, like a budget of, I don't know, $100, do we want to spread that thinly across 10 different organizations, investing in them through supplier diversity, or do we want to be very intentional about investing in one or two and making sure we can maximize what they can do out of it? So I just love that quote. I wanted to share it with you. Okay,